Hey there, welcome to the Life and Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Tegan Travato, founder and CEO of Bright Arrow Coaching. In this show, we dive deep into how leaders like you can turn business challenges into personal growth opportunities. Whether you're a seasoned executive or an aspiring leader, this podcast is your go-to resource for unlocking your full potential in both your professional and personal life. Join me as we hear from executives, experts, and innovators about their leadership journeys and learn how to develop better strategies and activate them for success. So if you're ready to fuel your journey to becoming an extraordinary leader who makes a lasting impact, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. I'm delighted to welcome Rebecca Ryan back to the show. As a refresher, Rebecca is a top 50 futurist, economist, best-selling author, and keynote speaker who wakes up daily hell-bent on making the world better for future generations. Through foresight experiences that transform her clients into future-ready leaders with bold plans, Rebecca empowers organizations to thrive in uncertain times. A graduate of Drake University and the University of Houston's Strategic Foresight program, she's also a proud member of the Global Association of Professional Futurists. In our discussion today, Rebecca will address urgent challenges like leadership turnover, team culture in the face of high attrition, and maintaining a balance between innovation and stability. For directors and leaders determined to excel amid unpredictability, her wisdom on aligning values, fostering resilience, and leveraging the synergy between human capacity, capability, and emerging technologies is invaluable. So grab your favorite brew, settle in, and prepare for an in-depth conversation that will elevate your leadership perspective. Without further ado, here's Rebecca Ryan. Rebecca Ryan, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Tegan.
Listeners, you are in for a treat. If you've been following the Life and Leadership Podcast since our inception, you're going to recognize Rebecca Ryan. We have had her on before. And I was super excited when I reached out to say, hey, would you mind returning and being a repeat guest? That she said yes. So thank you again.
It was an easy yes, Tegan. I think all of your listeners know you're a great guide. You care about people. Like, let's do this. Come on.
Thanks. Oh, you're the best. I already told you this, Rebecca, but for listeners to know, we've all been through so much since Rebecca was on the podcast. This was like 5 years ago. It was pre-pandemic. All of us have probably lived a million lifetimes in that time. I know when Rebecca and I were catching up, we were both like, wow, we have lived a lot of life personally since we last connected. And as a futurist, I was super curious about her view of the world and what is to come, especially on the back of a really tumultuous and fascinating last several years. So for our listeners, Rebecca, just to level set, tell us what a futurist does, and at least at a high level, how you go about doing it.
I think the easiest way for people to understand what a futurist does is first think about taking history classes in school. You all have this experience of learning about history, or at least one textbook's telling of history. So that's sort of the study of the past. And then journalists, they take a commitment to report on the facts of the present. So now we've got history in the past, journalism in the present. And as a futurist, I and my colleagues who do this professionally, we study the future. And some of you might say, oh, but the future hasn't happened. How do you study it? Well, what we do, and I think this gets to the second part of your question, Tegan, how do we do it, is we study trends. For example, right now I'm preparing for a big economic summit, and I'm looking at the projections for labor force trends, what this state is going to become by 2040, by 2050, who their residents are. Are they getting older? Are they getting younger? How is the economy changing? How is it predicted to change? So I look at trends and projections for the future, and then I help clients shape their future.
Beautiful. And what industries do you end up working in the most these days?
The vast majority of our work hits in a couple of buckets. One is like public sector, so cities, counties, regions. The second are economic development organizations or chambers of commerce. So these are organizations who care a lot about the future and making sure they're future ready. And then the bucket like public utility districts. So public utility districts run a bit like school boards. So they have an elected body that directs the utility. But some of you live in areas that have investor-owned utilities. Some of you live in areas, maybe you're run by rural electric co-ops, very innovative groups. And then there are public utility districts. So basically anything that affects a lot of people at scale is where we work.
I'm curious why. Why did you end up, with a groundswell of clients in these areas?
Well, the public sector part of it, I think, is from my childhood and my growing up. So I was raised in a very religious family, and they were very service-oriented for the church. And when I was in elementary school, my mom ran for alderperson in her district. And I've always really been struck by that public sector service. But there's also a very pragmatic reason, which is I don't want to have a big firm. I'm not made for managing people. I always want to work on the front lines with clients. And so to have a small firm, like we're 4 or 5 people, and to be able to make the most difference with our lives, we have to work like an acupuncture needle. It's like, where can we put our dab of good where it can do the most? And for us, if we can work with large cities or tier 2 communities, between 500,000 and 1 million people, or utility districts that affect millions of consumers, that is a really good ROI for us. We're able to have hopefully a positive impact on a lot of people.
I'm just going to share that resonates so much with what we're doing here. So we're a small company, as you know, and our mission is to create a more abundant and equitable world because of great leaders. And we posit that we would have solved famine and inequity if leaders were making the best decisions in alignment with values, right? And so we also say something similar to what you just did, which is we're making our small impact as much as we can, our ripple in the pond, in a hope of creating a better world that way. And when I hear you talk about the industries you're serving, I'm so glad you're helping them think about the future, because we're all so served by those organizations and those industries. So just a fan moment of, hey, look, we're kind of doing something similar, and thank you. And I appreciate the quote you just said, which is, where can we put our dab of good that it can do the most good? What a great statement.
I can't take credit for that. So Wavy Gravy, he was, for those boomers who listen to your podcast, you will remember Wavy Gravy. He was kind of front and center during the last age of Aquarius. And he talked often about just putting your dab of good where it can do good. And that's pretty simple and straightforward and resonant.
And I would just encourage listeners to ask yourselves the same question. I mean, let's squeeze the juice out of all of this right off the bat. Where can you put your dab of good that it will do the most good? So, beautiful start. Thank you, Rebecca. So for listeners today, we're going to focus on some questions I have for Rebecca that are based on a thought piece that she and her team have put out. And we'll link to this in the show notes, but 10 trends for the next 10 years. As someone who is often thinking about the future with leaders, I had a really hard time choosing which we would focus on today because we can't do all 10. So I've come to a handful that I'm just nerdily most interested in myself, just because of the way I live my life.
Let's do it. You can't go wrong. Pick the ones that are right for you. Yeah,
yes.
Good. I like it.
Good. And of course, for our listeners by proxy, right? So churn is one of your top 10. So what would you have listeners know about the trend of churn and what might be right under their noses related to this that they're missing?
Okay. Well, first of all, your target audience is leaders. You want them to make aligned, value-led choices. And what I would say is if you have had more than 10% of your team turnover, if you yourself are new to a team recently, and certainly if you've had half or more of your team turnover, you are living in this time of churn. And that's just at the organizational level. In our cities and states, there is a ton of churn happening as well. And I think this is one of the long tails of COVID. People recognized that life was not infinite. And so they were like, ooh, where am I going to put my dab of good? Or how do I want to spend what might be limited time that I have left? And leaders have made this choice too. Challenger Gray and Christmas every fall is coming out with data in 2023, now in 2024, saying more leaders have voluntarily left their organization than since the time that they've been measuring. So what I want leaders to know is if you have left or if your people have left, you are not alone. I think we suffer when we think, oh, it's only happening to us. This is happening darn near everywhere.
Yes.
And the second thing that I would have you know is that culture walks on 2 feet. I mean, you know this. Okay, let's say you're a leader who has a group of, let's say, 20. And let's say that 10 people left and 10 people have come in. So you'd be like, well, my team is unchanged. I still have 20 people. Your team is 100% different because the 10 people who left could have been your culture keepers, the ones who were sort of the straw that stirs the drink. And your new 10 people, because they're new, they don't know how things work. And so that can be very upsetting to the culture of a team. So what I would have you know is that churn needs to be managed and culture doesn't just happen. And you probably are painfully aware of that, but you set the tone. The flavor of the sundae starts at the top. So if you're not getting more cooperation with your team, okay, what can I do as a leader to reward, instill more cooperation? Or if you're not getting enough pushback, if you're like, God, everybody just agrees with what I say. I mean, unless you have like a mental illness, you know that that is not healthy either. So what are the things that you can do to demonstrate, reward, inform, excite people around the culture that you want in your team?
Yeah.
And then the final thing I just have to say is I was on LinkedIn the other day, and you know how sometimes they have like, you are one of the most qualified people to answer this question. I took the bait. And the question was,
They were counting on it, Rebecca.
exactly. Well, it worked. You're welcome, LinkedIn. The question was something like, how do you balance on a team between innovation and stability? And I just think the wording of the question is so messed up because leadership is happening moment to moment, week to week, month by month. And sometimes your teams do need to be fired up. And sometimes they need to be hosed down. It's not just one thing. We shouldn't just moderate for more stability or just moderate for more innovation. As a leader, it's your job to feel into what's needed.
Yeah. What I loved about that answer is how complex it is, which is leadership in a nutshell. It's complicated. So here we are calling out that disruption's happening quickly, teams are turning over, churn by definition is happening for all of us. And yet we're trying to create this sort of slow to form culture and protect it. And while we have to be nimble and agile as leaders, we still have to try to build this thing that takes time to build and nurture. And it's so complicated now, or it can be. So I just want to pay some reverence to that. That's a tricky one.
100%. I've been talking with some of my colleagues about what is this Challenger Gray and Christmas CEO turnover telling us. And I think the most insightful thing I heard was from Don McPherson, who he does long form thinking. And we talked about this and he said, I think the job of being the CEO is much harder than it was. So a little bit of grace for ourselves as leaders. It is a hard job.
It's harder than it's ever been. One, love Don. He's joining us on the podcast in a couple of months. I love that you two know each other. And of course you do, right? It's such a small world. But I agree with you about how he thinks. It's precisely why I've asked him to come have a chat. And I agree with his thought on CEOs. So as someone who is in private counsel with them, and as one myself, I'll just throw myself in the mix. What I've come to appreciate, there is so much ambiguity. And what's so terrible about the model of the CEO role in the organization, I'm sure you'll agree, is you've got the board here pulling up on the CEO. Here's what we want. Here's what we need. You've got the community of employees and leaders below the CEO pulling and pulling. And it's just like this terrible finger trap that they're in with sometimes vastly different values that each of those, really big buckets of stakeholders want from one single individual. And then we've thrown them into a time where there is no predictability like there used to be. You used to do economic forecasting by 5 and 10-year cycles and be able to build businesses based on that. And now it's what happened this week? What's your best guess? Which bet do you want to place? And let's all cross our fingers. But hey, while you're at it, prove to us you're thinking the right way. I mean, it is such an unwinnable model at the moment. So I agree that we need to be kind, not just to our CEOs, but to ourselves, because that ambiguity trickles down, right?
Yeah. The image that came to mind was like Pat Summitt or Gino Auriemma. Like I follow women's basketball. Pat Summitt, one of the most winningest coaches of the Tennessee Lady Volunteers. Gino Auriemma, I think now the winningest coach, UConn Huskies. And they would scream at the referees and they would scream at their players. You know, so it's like they were in the finger trap too, right? So, and what I'm wondering is, like, from your perspective, Tegan, is this the reason why leaders have to be so clear about their own values? So clear, because then they can say to, and this happened to me recently with a client, a leader said to his board, if you need me to be X, I will quit. I will not do it. So he had a clarity about what his values were. And I think it has made that relationship with the board easier. He's less of like a marionette or maybe not in as much of the finger trap there. What do you think about that?
I think we should all be very clear on our values and which ways we're willing to stretch against and for them on occasion. What came up for me when you said that were two immediate thoughts before you finished your story. One, either this person earned a ton of respect and it built things for them, or two, he's out of there and good luck finding another job. Because depending on how a board terminates a CEO relationship, that could be it for the duration of their career. That's how serious that can be, which is terrible. Again, just another reason that job is so hard and people will never understand unless they do it. But what I love is that story demonstrates what it looks like to fully live in our values and say, hi, my values are also my boundaries for you. So while I will go and earn the valuation we need, and I will go and have our revenue hit the targets we need to hit, we will deliver these products. While I'm doing it, this is what I will not do. And I think that gains more respect than it would anything in what I've seen in the world. But it all depends on your board's makeup. They have their own culture, right, Rebecca? The board is its own company in a way in terms of how it behaves and governs and thinks and its norms and its ways of operating. So I always say yes to values alignment. It's part of what makes us human. It's part of what makes work feel good or not good, is how well we get to align. So big yes, and also high risk in that seat. If the values alignment isn't there with the board, right?
Yep.
So any other thoughts on that now that I shared back?
Well, I'm not thinking so much about corporate boards. I'm thinking more about elected boards. And
so community boards, in other words.
Yeah, like city councils or public utility boards. And while you are right that they have their own culture, it feels like a culture that is more like malleable because they don't work together 60 hours a week. They work together sort of on occasion, and they rely so much on the staff.
I see.
And so I think for those kinds of boards, they may have a culture, but I think their culture in a way can almost be more impacted by the values of the organization or maybe by the CEO. But man, that is money to take to the bank, Tegan, values as boundaries.
It is.
And I think boards, like all of us, I think we will mostly listen to what people's boundaries are. And I mean, if we're decent humans, we're going to try to respect what those are as well.
I appreciate you pointing out what can feel different about a board in terms of how it's appointed, elected, who they represent. It's a nice reminder in the world that some are really already aligned to the communities they serve in more alignment than what we see in profit-driven organizations oftentimes. So that's beautiful. And yeah, I mean, just to demonstrate how values alignment makes us feel, like anger is a core emotion we have. And the key definition of anger is that we experience anger when our values have been violated. Like that's the definition from emotion researchers, right?
Yeah.
So it's our boundaries, whether we realize there are boundaries or not, but they certainly evoke really clear feeling in us when we're being treated in alignment with them or not aligned with them.
As a Zen practitioner, anger is very useful.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not in a tradition that tries to pretend we don't have feelings or we're just these neutral stones.
Good.
I'm
supportive of that.
Right on. Well, it's the human experience. If you live with hands and feet, you're going to have some anger from time to time. So for me, the practice is, okay, what in my anger is useful?
Mm-hmm.
And the question I would use after you raise this issue is what can this teach me about my values and my boundaries? Thank you. This has been great.
Yeah, anger is such a motivating emotion. It helps us get unstuck and get moving and make a difference when we want to use it that way. So while we're on the jaunt of human behavior related to churn, as I was reading the thought piece on this particular section, the word welcome came up several times just to kind of give a glimpse. The thought piece is broken down really nicely into a couple different buckets for each, focus area. And, one of the things Rebecca talks about is what to watch for related to this trend. So when she's talking about churn, one of the things that she said was new neighbors, welcome them, new hires, welcome them, right? And so, as someone reading this with fresh eyes, I was like, wow, what's our ability to welcome look like now? After we went into this isolation and we've got a lot of data telling us that, we're not humaning too well in community anymore and organized religion's fallen off. So the ways we get together aren't the same. And I have sat with the question myself about how well do we commune? And so when I see welcome said so many times, I just sat back and I thought, I wonder what Rebecca thinks about our ability to welcome in our culture, lately and what you've been seeing, because we can have these trends, but if we don't have the skill to actualize or internalize them or personalize them, then it's just interesting information.
Yeah.
So when you think about the ability to welcome, what have you been seeing in your work?
Well, it's been asleep for a little while. We were told to put our social interactivity in IRL. We were told to put it to sleep. Mm-hmm. So I was just convening a board meeting yesterday, and this is a board that meets on Zoom. We're all over the world. Our time is finite. And yesterday in my world was a Sunday. So it's also a day that people are with their family, or it's a weekend, right? So there's a tendency to just dive bomb into what's on the agenda. Mm-hmm. And I just refuse to do that. We just went around alphabetical order by first name. How are you? That was the question. This is such a human question. And it both makes us human, it allows us to express ourselves. And one of the things that makes us human is our desire to connect. Mm-hmm. So what is welcoming? What welcoming is making an overture from the native person, the person who's lived on this block, to the new person to say, welcome to this new block that you live on. I am here. That is where I live, pointing across the street. I always have flour. I always have sugar. I'm always available to you. If you'd like my cell phone number, I'd be happy to share it with you. That is such a simple gesture. And I'm going to tell you right now, that is the kind of shit that you get remembered for when you die. Mm-hmm. It is not how many emails you pumped through today. It is, Tegan is the first person I met on my block.
Mm-hmm. And as you say that, the piece I would add on is when a Rebecca gives you her cell phone number and offers your sugar and flour, find an excuse to need some sugar and flour and send a message back. That's the piece.
Yep.
You can't have a bunch of community starters, reignite our humanness and then miss the cues or miss the bids for a relationship, right? We have to sort of be looking for them. I think they're rare these days. And so I would encourage listeners as we think about this future we're in, what is it we're going to do to return the ball and be on the lookout for those precious invitations out in the world. So I love that. That's really beautiful. All right, let's talk a bit about senolytics. So Rebecca, I don't know if you know this about me, but I am a longevity nerd. I'm one of those people that gets blood work done every year to find out my internal age and then change my diet and my exercise regimen to try to reduce it. And I can't get enough of it. I'm so excited to be alive right now in this age of science. I'm an older mom, right? Like I had a kid at 40. I need to live a long time and not just live, but I want to be helpful and vibrant. So I was really stoked to see Senolytics hit your top 10. And that's nerd speak for what? Tell our listeners about Senolytics and humanize that for us a bit.
Okay. So for a long time, we have studied aging. And this is what has brought about the ability for you, Tegan, to be like a nerd about longevity, right? Because we know so much more now about how the meat suit ages.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that scientists have found is that as we get older, senescent cells, senescent, senescent cells accumulate in older bodies. And what are senescent cells? They're basically zombie cells. They're the opposite of a healthy cell. So a healthy cell, as you may remember from biology in school, a healthy cell divides and just continues to divide and creates more versions of itself. And ideally, those are healthy versions of itself. And it's what allows like your liver to be a completely new liver in 7 years is because of that natural genesis of cells. Well, there's cells that are like squished, icky, sick versions of healthy cells. And here's what makes them very unattractive or unwanted is like a true zombie, they turn all the cells around them into senescent cells as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we now know that senescence is tied to things like failing eyesight, skin that wrinkles over time, some of the other sort of hallmarks of aging, like how does it impair balance or, make your skin get thinner, etc. But the nerds at Scripps and Mayo have been doing some research that says, hey man, if we can actually flush these senescent cells out of our bodies, number one, that's great because then they don't turn all these other cells around them into zombie cells, but it just opens the field so that the healthy cells can once again flourish. So some of the early research is showing that, yeah, you can stop or in some cases reverse signs of aging. So senolytics, I mean, when you think about in the United States as an example, 1,100 people are turning 65 every single day. This is the baby boom generation. So we are going to have a whole bunch of much older people. And much like Tegan, they want to stay active and vibrant for as long as they can. And so senolytics, I put it in my top 10 because when I think about how our country is aging overall, senolytics really does have the potential to turn back time.
What gets me so excited about this from a work standpoint and a purpose standpoint is the invitation it creates for many lives within our life, right? So if we think that those of us in our 40s, certainly those in your 30s, are going to live to be 100, 120, hands down. Like we're going to experience technology that helps with senescence, cancer, dementia, like it's all on the way. But what do we want to do with that time? We've all planned and our insurance policies are aligned to us dying by 85 and we need to retire by 60. The future of work is going to be so opportune and enriching. I'm curious your thoughts on how that may change our model.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest change it's going to make possibly in the workplace model is what we also know about how our brains change over time. So up until the age of 50, we can really join a lot of different information together. I think of it as sort of like the fireworks display of intellectual energy, right? And then after 50, we're really good at consolidating and seeing the patterns in things. And we have more patience to like train other people and teach other people. And so, first of all, my hope would be that everybody would maybe stop having a midlife crisis that makes them idiots for a period of time and start to embrace this, sort of under 50, older 50. These are very gross demarcations, but this is like what Arthur C. Clarke and others who study this have found. And so I'm 52 as we're recording this. Could those of us who are older embrace this time in our life as like, okay, now my job is to teach and to mentor and to be the person that a younger person might call when they need a pep talk instead of thinking I have to army crawl until I retire, it keeps us from being human if we can't embrace these very natural life stages.
Yes, I'm so hopeful for that. I can imagine a future of work where, we have augmented work hours where people don't need to work so many hours at a certain point financially and just for other purpose-oriented reasons. And may we go ahead and just change that for everybody anyway. Like, why do we have to wait till a certain age to reduce our work hours? So I think that invites us to reimagine, what is a work week? What is our purpose at work? And what is it like to have folks who have gone decades before us staying on decades longer, who know where the bodies are buried and have this wisdom,
That's right.
in that pattern spotting ability as our brains change, to your point. What if we kept them on board longer and in some model? How rich would that be for our clients and for us? That's coaches, right? Like, a lot of the coaches with Bright Arrow are in their 50s and 60s and going to keep on working because they love the work, and they're bringing that wisdom into the workplace and into leadership. So I think coaching could be part of that future. And I could see that embedded inside of organizations as one of the ways we contribute as we've gathered decades of experience under our belt. So I can't wait to see what happens there. Because I have helped a couple of CEOs retire, and we have 2 or 3 in our ecosystem that are preparing for retirement, Rebecca. And the panic that I watch these leaders go through as they know they're preparing to exit hurts. I mean, it hurts to just watch that their entire being and their families have rallied around them to serve in this particular role, which is ending. And so to have to pivot and what feels to them like a brand new identity kind of overnight is scary. And arguably, we don't need to do it that way.
I'm with you 100%. I mean, there should be a way. I'm thinking about like climbing sort of a ladder of work. And I don't mean it in the ladder sense that you guys might be thinking about it. I'm not talking about promotions and more pay. But the idea being that in the same way that you climb up it, you ought to be able to climb down it. And what we do is when you retire, we just push your ladder off the building. I mean, it's so rude, right?
Yes.
So like I think about my colleague, Charlie, who he is in his 70s now. And at the point that felt natural to us both, I was like, how do you want to do this moving forward? And he was like, I don't want to come to the weekly team meetings, but I want to come to the first one every month because that's the one when we do our scorecard. I was like, okay. He's like, and I want to be brought in on things where you think I could add some value. Okay. So, we continue to see him several times a month. We miss him. I know he misses us, but it's the time.
Yeah.
And by the way, we're taking our whole team to Tucson in February where he lives. Like the team meeting is coming to him. So there are a lot of more kind ways that we can honor somebody who wants to work differently.
Yeah. Yes.
Work less.
Well, thanks for spelling out what that can look like for listeners. It can be that simple. And the value you will actualize from your continued relationship with him, I know you cannot even quantify. I can tell by the look on your face as we're talking about it. So win-win. Well, as we're imagining the future of work, we'll stay on that bend and talk about magic. So I love that you call it magic. And the quote that brought you to call it magic, you said in this piece, was Arthur C. Clarke said, "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic." And so I think we can all feel AI is that at this point.
That's right. The 2 vowels in magic are AI. And I think I have a different perspective on AI than what you may have heard anyone else talk about, because I do think there's a fetishization of this. I think especially the tech bros think we're going to create sentience. But here's what I want to say about the future of AI. Where I think this is going to play out over the next 10 years is we're going to get really clear on the things that human beings are much better at. And so far, we know that human beings have an absolute edge in empathy. They have an edge in complex problem solving, motivating others. So I think about, for example, my friend's mother was diagnosed with cancer. And her non-AI, non-robot doctor made everyone a cup of tea and brought it into the room and said, let's talk about this. That is like a human at their peak potential in a caring profession.
Yeah.
Is that doctor going to use AI? Is that doctor going to, I don't know, maybe be able to use protein folding or some of the amazing things that AI is doing in medicine? God, I hope so.
Yeah.
If it's available, I hope they use it. But the very human holding a hand when somebody gets a diagnosis like that,
Irreplaceable.
irreplaceable.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are things that AIs do better.
Yeah.
And we're going to continue to learn more about what that is. And then the Venn diagram overlap is where we have humans and AIs working together on things. But I am not one of these futurists who's like, oh, AI, it's the be all and the end all, and it's going to be all good or it's going to be all bad. No one knows.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if we can continue to get clear on what it is that humans are uniquely humaned to do, and continue to figure out what AIs can do exceptionally well, we're going to have a better chance at the future.
Yeah. One of the things we're seeing with our clients is that a lot of individual leaders and executives are waiting for the enterprise to make a decision about AI. They're ready, like they're eager. They're like, let's figure out what we want to do. But I'm not seeing a lot of personalization in the adoption of AI, not consistently at least. And so I'm curious your thoughts on how we might develop a more personal relationship with the tech, what you're seeing out there. I mean, someone might listen to this a year from now and go, that was a dumb question. Who knows how fast this is going to move? I think we know how fast, actually. But I'm curious your thoughts on what are you seeing in terms of individual leaders and organizations, at the human level and their personalization of the tech as part of the journey for the enterprise.
When you say personalization of the tech, Tegan, what do you mean by that phrase?
Meaning a lot of folks watch the science as if it's this thing that they're going to make a decision if they touch it or not.
Oh.
And at the individual level, I'm not seeing a lot of I'm using it, I'm experimenting with it, not the way I thought I would.
Yeah, interesting.
It's still a concept to a lot of folks rather than something that's present in their lives. Does that make better sense?
That helps me understand what you're saying. And this is why we have people who are so afraid because they haven't used anything. So there are a few companies who are really leading and they have some very clear, user-friendly, anybody can use. So try them. Try them all. If you could see my browser window right now, I have ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Copilot. But the idea being get your hands dirty. Make it a point to see what is happening out there. We just had a Nobel Prize winner win in 2024 for what they have been able to do with AI. So I'm just not a believer in watching and waiting. I think you should get in there and use the tools. Because if you don't, then everything that you're going to receive is going to be second party and third party, and we're going to consultantize AI. And I personally, for myself, I would never want to outsource this kind of decision. I would want to have the experience myself, put it in my own body, figure it out, and go from there. So the organizations I respect a lot are doing this widespread. They're telling everybody, try it.
Well, as we're coming to the top of our time together, I'm going to ask you two more personal questions. One is, first, how do you feel about the future personally? If you had to give us one word that embodies, here's how I feel about the future.
Optimistic.
Good.
Do you want to know why?
Yeah, you knew it was coming. Thank you. Please proceed.
What I feel and sense and hear around me is a lot of dread. But then when I look at people's media diets or where they're spending their online time, I get it. Because the algorithm around social media is meant to keep your eyeballs there. And most people now know that the algorithm is that enragement is engagement. So I understand why people feel dreadful. They're perfectly programmed. And you versus a $3 trillion industry, you're going to lose to industry every single time. So my diet of information is much different than most people's diet of information. And the primary part of my diet of information is talking with my clients, being a member of my neighborhood, being a member of my Zen dojo, going to my bakery a couple times a week, being out and about in the world, and just saying to people like, what are you excited about? Like, what are you working on? And when I hear what real people are working on and doing in their communities, it is impossible to be pessimistic because the people around me are working on things big and small and striving for brighter futures. They want the world to be better for their kids and for their grandkids. And you never read about this stuff, in your social media feed, unless you're really trying to. And you don't read about this in the news unless you watch the very last part of your local news program, which is like the human interest story or the one page in the paper that is like the person of the week. Everything is being fed to keep us watching. And unfortunately, those are the parts that do not feed our better angels. So I'm optimistic about the future because the real work that's happening is flipping fantastic.
Oh, that's so inspiring. So great to hear. Thank you for that. And finally, if you had a billboard and you could share one message with leaders, what might you post on that billboard to really create some sentiment inside of people?
Yeah. So the 3 words that come to mind, and then I'll do a quick explainer because I don't want to trigger anybody. But I would put 3 words on every billboard in every U.S. city. We can start there. And the 3 words would be, you will die. And I'm not trying to trigger anybody, but the reason I want those to be the words is because left to our own devices, we are selfish people. And in my work over these 26 years, when I have asked people to work on behalf of their children and their grandchildren, we get much different results. We get much better results. So you will die is just an invitation to stop centering yourself.
Beautiful. And think about our legacy and what we're imparting. Oh, Rebecca, thank you. And I love that we can mix the feeling of optimism with the sentiment that we are all going to die. And what do we want to do with this time? So you wouldn't see those 2 things in print and think those are related and balanced, but they sure are with some explanation. So thank you so much. And just thank you for the work you're doing in the world and in industries that enable us all to live comfortably here and to grow economically. So appreciate you. Thank you for coming back with us and spending some time.
It's my pleasure, Tegan. We're united in what we're trying to do. We're different feathers on the same wing. So Thank you for the opportunity.
Beautiful. I hope you found Rebecca Ryan's insights as stimulating and profound as I did. Her perspective on leadership challenges, team culture, and the importance of focusing on legacy over self serves as an example for all of us navigating the complexities of modern leadership. Rebecca's concept of leaders embedding their values deeply, managing high turnover, and embracing the duality of optimism and mortality offers invaluable wisdom in an era where the stakes of effective leadership have never been higher. We can contribute to a more resilient and enriched future by fostering a culture of empathy and forward thinking. So I invite you today to reflect on these ideas and consider how they can be integrated into your own leadership journey. Let this episode inspire you to lead with clarity, adaptability, and a deep commitment to the greater good. Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Life and Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed our conversation, don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube Music, and share it with anyone who might benefit from it. We'll catch you on the next episode.